number 9. Sorry.
We were on such a roll, Madam Secretary.
Okay, number 9.
Perhaps too much of a roll.
Borough of Brooklyn, calendar number 9, CD 12C150115 PQK. A public hearing in the matter of an application for the acquisition of property concerning Amico Senior Center.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The first speaker is Dr. Joan Pastore.
Good morning. I hope everybody has a copy of my testimony. Okay, great. I am Dr. Joan Pastore. I'm the director of the Amico 59th Street Senior Center. First of all, I'd like to say good morning to Chairperson Weisbrod, as well as all the other commissioners, and thank you for this opportunity. The Amico Senior Center has been in existence since the early 1970s and has been housed at its present site, 5901 13th Avenue, from its inception. Since its opening, thousands, if not tens of thousands, of older adults have come through the center's doors seeking a sense of community, belonging, and fellowship. The center has also provided a safety net for the many frailer, more vulnerable older adults who now may need additional support. Each day, the center offers a noontime meal, opportunities for socialization, and countless educational and recreational activities and social work services to 300 to 400 older adults. Trips, yoga, dance, ping pong, karaoke, tai chi, and ESL are just a few of the activities that the center offers. For the young and old, Amico also offers volunteer opportunities. We have social work interns from New York University Graduate School of Social Work, developmentally disabled younger volunteers from the local PDS chapter and the Department of Education, and many local high schools and college students who need to do community service or an internship. For the older adult who has become more frail and vulnerable, the center offers casework services to assist with any issue that may arise, issues such as housing, transportation, and healthcare needs. Amico has also been part of the larger community since its beginning. The center has many affiliations with other community organizations: Maimonides Medical Center, the Department of Education, AARP, JASA Catholic Charities, and the Chinese Planning Council, just to name a few. Amico has also allowed community and governmental agencies to use the center space for community meetings. In addition, the center operates as a cooling center and warming center during weather-related emergencies and is open to all community members during those times. Amico has also received much support from city, state, and federal elected officials who have been very generous with their support of the center and the services it provides. In closing, the Amico 59th Street has been a vital part of the Brooklyn Community Board 12 for many years. As the community has changed, so has the center changed and evolved over the years to meet the needs of today's older residents of the community. Today's membership is reflective of the changing demographics of the community. Amico hopes and expects to be able to serve this community for many years to come. We wholeheartedly ask that the City Planning Commission support our efforts for the renewal of our lease for the next 20 years. Thank you for this opportunity, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pastore. Questions? Ms. Delauz.
Hi, Dr. Pastore. Thanks
Hi.
for being here. I'm just wondering, how long have you been the director of the center?
Oh, do I have to commit since 1984?
That's wonderful.
Yeah,
Thanks
it's
so
been
much
home for me.
that work.
Yeah.
The reason why I'm asking also is because I would assume then that you're probably familiar with some of the needs for repairs and things like that that are at the center. And I'm just wondering if you could speak to that at all, because I know that's one of the things that's in negotiation with the landlord.
We have had a couple of long-term issues, certainly with the roof. The landlord has replaced the roof, but it still manages to leak in certain areas. I was told actually by one of the men who worked on the building in the 1970s that because the windows went in last, it was always going to leak. But the roof is also used for a play area. So, but leaking in the stairwell, if it hits it the right way, that's been a long-term issue. We've also had a recent issue with the elevator, and this is something that I hope to negotiate, or hope it gets negotiated, that they have a new law that they have to do inspections. So in addition to the building department inspections, we now have an inspection done by the elevator company with a third-party witness, which winds up costing the center a lot of money, which we really don't have. The third-party witness, you have to pay several $100s for, but then they always seem to find new codes or very minor problems that always seem to cost $2,000 or $3,000 a year. So we don't mind paying for the maintenance contract, but it's all these other additional costs that we're asked to absorb, and we're having a hard time absorbing all these additional costs all the time.
And so you're hoping to have that covered by the landlord, is that what?
Yeah,
you're
if it's,
thinking?
if it's something rather than just routine maintenance, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Levin?
Well, Dr. Pastore, just wanted to thank you for coming today.
My
We're
pleasure.
facing a wave, as you know, of similar renewals for daycare centers and senior centers across the city, and it's pretty unusual to have a facilities director come and speak to us directly, and it's really, really helpful. So thank you for taking the time out of what I'm
Absolutely,
sure
my
is a
pleasure.
crowded schedule. Commissioner Deleuze essentially asked the question I have. You know, when leases are up for renewal, now's our chance to negotiate with the landlord to the best we can and fix whatever problems may exist. So thank you for the testimony you just provided. As long as you're here, I guess I'd like to ask you about changes in the way senior centers deliver their services over time. It's 20 years or 40 years since this center was created. Are there changing best practices in the way you're serving your population that would be instructive for the configuration of senior centers in general? I'm not asking about your facility in particular, but just
general.
the way in which you service this important and growing population.
Well, probably a couple of trends. Certainly, a more recent immigrant population, so it's a lot more diverse, and the needs become a little bit more complicated. We still have members who joined 30 years ago, so we have an older, frailer population, and they have one set of needs, and then you have younger, more recent immigrants, and they have a different set of needs. Something that has complicated senior centers, and this is going a little bit off track, they have all of these what are called pop-up adult daycare centers that we're now competing with, and financially we cannot compete with them. And the last trend that I've seen probably for the last 10, 12 years, there's been no increase in budgets. The demands have been added on. Staff is expected to do more, to have a higher level of expertise, yet the budget is not reflective. So we are very dependent on outside groups to provide quality of services, just because, for example, in a center like mine, 300 to 400 people, 10 staff, and half of them are maintenance or dietary. So we're being asked to do more and more. And quite frankly, in a lot of centers, you're seeing a lot of turnover of staff because salary levels are so low and workload is so high.
So do you do private fundraising or?
Yeah, we do.
Okay, so how much of your budget are you able to cover with private donations? Or is it in kind? Other groups come into service?
Well, it's both. We try to maybe like 5 to 10%. And then what other services we can get in kind from organizations or individuals.
Thank you, that's helpful to know.
Dr. Pastore, I also am very grateful that you have come here today because for reasons both that Ms. Deleuze and Ms. Levin indicated, it is unusual not only that we have a center director appear before us directly, but especially one who has been in charge over a span of time. And as you probably recall, when this lease was last renewed, it was highly controversial in 1992 or 93, and it was approved just by a bare majority of the commission because there were concerns about the repairs and work that had to be done at that time. And we're often in the position where we are being asked to approve these renewals on the expectation that repairs will be made, but without necessarily the assurance that repairs are going to be made, despite the commitment of the city, because obviously it's requires both the city and the landlord to agree. So my first question is, Since you were there when this lease was last renewed, were the repairs made in 1992 or 1993 that the commission at that time was assured would be made?
The landlord did come in, and he did do what was in the scope of work. I think at times there have been some issues, and DIFTA has gotten involved and made him do what needed to be done, because sometimes the way it was written that it was vague, but for the major items on the scope of work, they were done. Not always done to how I think they should be done. But
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last.
they were not always done to what I would say is my standard. So sometimes me and the landlord differ. There have been times, and Lee could probably speak to this, when there were difficulties with the landlord, that DIFTA got involved and resolved the situation successfully. So he has actually, we're talking about a roof, he's replaced it twice since I've been there, which, is a big cost. So he will come in with the crew and do whatever the work scope says, to answer your question.
And is this the same landlord throughout for the last?
Yes.
Have, as just going back to your answer to Ms. Levin's question about how services have changed over the last 20 or 40 years, actually, since this lease was first entered into. Is this, have you considered moving from this location to another location, or look for more modern space during that period?
Well, if you ask me what my wish is, of course. Realistically, we're not going to find another space like that. I mean, it's a substantial size space. We put, in addition to the landlord putting in money, the Department for the Aging has put in a lot of money to the center, but we're not going to find a center, we're not going to find comparable space. I mean, that I know. I've looked for other centers. It just doesn't exist. This space is perfect for our needs. Otherwise, believe me, we probably would have moved.
Is that because of availability of space in the neighborhood, or costs, or what?
Certainly availability in the neighborhood, but in order for us to find center space that was adequate, we would have to find space that was set up for a senior center. And it just doesn't exist. I mean, we'd wind up in a church basement or a synagogue basement, which is not what we want to do. I mean, it wouldn't suit our purposes. I mean, it's just very hard to come by. I wish there was better space available.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Ms. Ortiz?
Hi, good morning. The borough president had requested some improvements to the exterior, or the sidewalks, I should say, the street trees and, enlargement of the sidewalk. So I was curious, how your seniors are getting there, how are they arriving, or most walking? Is this issue of, the pedestrian experience outside of your center an important one for you?
It is something that we are very concerned with. I have met with the police captain. I've certainly been involved with the community board. But to answer your original question, they come by a variety of ways. I don't know, you can't tell from the pictures here. We do have an accessorized space right in front of that door there. Some of our seniors, our older, frailer ones, take accessorized. Some of them will take public transportation. A lot of them walk, ride their bicycles, or come with their cars. So it is an issue because of you can't see here, it's adjoined to a lumberyard where there is a lot of traffic and difficulties. So that is something that we're working on as well.
Okay. And another unrelated question, I noticed that those are sort of large steel doors at the entrance. They're solid steel doors? The main entrance, it's a little hard to tell in that lower image.
I know they're according to regulation. I don't know if they're actually solid. They feel pretty heavy if you lift them up, but whatever the standard is.
Okay, and I'm curious, perhaps it's a regulatory issue, but one of the things, you've such fantastic activities in the interior and the entrance. It's hard to get a sense of what's happening inside, and I know a lot of these community centers are now they have windows, and there's transparency out onto the street, and it really improves the environment both for folks inside and outside, and, is that something that you've contemplated?
Well, certainly with the trees. We do share the building with another tenant who's on the first floor. So we did, since I'm there, we did put the lettering up on the building, which makes it, and it actually looks a lot nicer in person than this picture. The only thing I think we could anticipate is possibly doing a larger awning. But we're not on ground level. We're actually on the second and third floors. If you have a suggestion, I'm certainly open to it. I know I'm very fussy about that too, and I've played with a lot of different ideas over the years.
Yeah, no, and perhaps, the transparent doors would allow for some sort of visual, logo for,
Just saying like a glass door?
yeah, the heavy-duty glass doors that both you and the other tenant could put your logos
It's-
on
yeah,
so that you can see in and out. It also addresses safety concerns sometimes. I know seniors and others, you want to see inside a space,
Sure.
and you want others to see out, and that actually
Yeah, it's
enhances
actually a
the
pretty good
safety.
idea.
Yeah.
It's actually a pretty good idea. I hadn't thought of that. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Mr. Cantor, and then Ms. Delausse.
Morning.
Good morning.
Is there such a thing as a standard program or a basic program requirement for your facilities?
No, it's meant for the independent older adult, so they are free to come and go and participate to whatever degree that they like. So they come, they register, they need to be age 60 or above, and that's the only basic requirement. So if they want to come for one class, that's fine.
No, you're going further than I was trying to go.
Do we have regular activities?
No,
Okay.
let me try it again. If you were going out now looking for a facility,
Mm-hmm.
is there a basic blueprint that would indicate how much space one would need to do this?
Activity.
In other words, you're
As
going
far-
shopping. You're going
okay.
shopping.
As far as I know, that there is no specific square footage. What they go by, what we go by is if there's a public assembly permit. So if you have so many seniors in one given space, as I'm sure you know, then you need to have the public assembly permit. As far as I know, there's never been a requirement that if you have 100 seniors, you have to have X amount of square footage. But our facility is quite large, and it's probably one of the largest ones I've ever seen.
Because basically, Mr. Chairman, what I was thinking is, we are frequently getting requests for special permits or authorizations for community facilities from developers who don't yet have tenants. And since they're coming to us for some help and relief, perhaps we have the opportunity to do the same thing.
Indeed. Ms. Delausse.
Perhaps along the same lines, you were just saying that one of the new trends was the increasing percentage of the population that were frail elderly. And I'm just wondering, what kind of physical accommodations are you needing to make in your space in order to accommodate that population, especially as it grows?
Well, I'm happy to tell you we are 100% ADA compliant right now. We have the elevator, we have the handrails, we have the restrooms, so we're in good shape that way.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, any other questions for Dr. Pastore? Thank you very much. Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Jean. Not so fast.
So you mentioned that when you were discussing challenges, you mentioned that there's a proliferation of these adult, daycare facilities. I wonder if you could give us a little bit more color on how it is that you compete with them or they compete with you.
Oh, gosh, I could write a book on this. I've spent a lot of time and energy on this. One of the things that has happened, and you'll see this citywide, is they have popped up, and that's where the name comes from. They don't really leave a paper trail. One of the things that happens is they go into new immigrant communities. They're trying to go after Medicaid people, and they really target them. So, for example, they will offer them incentives, monetary incentives to join, and there's been a very large abuse of this, certainly by me in Sunset Park. In all of southern Brooklyn, you see this, but they will offer older adults monetary plus money, plus gifts, plus incentives for joining, and they will ask the older adult, they will say to them, let me see your white card. And white card means Medicaid card. So the older adults signing up, they don't appreciate that they are giving them a Medicaid card, and Medicaid is going to be charged $3,800 a month at taxpayers, and they're giving services. They're giving watered-down recreational services to people that really don't need them. So they're going to go after a healthy older adult, and adult daycare centers are meant for a frailer population that need special assistance. All right, so they're not serving the population they're supposed to be serving. They're exploiting a newer immigrant population, and they're wasting precious Medicaid dollars. And it got so bad to the point where they really started recruiting, very quietly recruiting in centers, senior centers, which are meant for the well elderly. They would actually pay an older adult, $5 a head. If you go in a senior center, pass out the cards. And so a lot of abuses. But how is it impacted on senior centers? In a lot of centers, the attendance has gone down because they're draining the well elderly out of the centers and giving them services that they don't need, but they don't realize what they're signing up for half the time. You're welcome.
Ms. Deluz?
Thanks for sharing that. So who does enforcement on that?
Oh, I could have a 3-hour conversation with you on this. The city blamed the state blamed federal. The Attorney General's office said nobody has regulation. And this has been going on for 2 or 3 years. The Attorney General, I don't know if you follow it in the papers, he has arrested some providers. The problem was they didn't have any regulations in place, so that they weren't catching them doing anything, but it was really Medicaid wasting dollars and Medicaid fraud. The City Council did pass something this past December. They passed a bill, which is a starting point. All right, but that's always been the problem. Nobody has regulatory responsibility, and everyone was having a field day with this.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Dr. Pastore? Thank you very much, Doctor. It was very, very, very helpful.
Thank you. I
really
appreciate the
it. Thank you.
opportunity. Thank you.
The next speaker is Joseph Sang.
I didn't get a chance to pass it out. Good morning, Chairman Weiss-Broad and all the commissioners. I'm here to try and give some of my experiences with 59th Street Senior Center and Amico. I worked 32 years in the corporate industry as a general manager and over 32 years in the military, retiring as a colonel. I pay my share of taxes during all this period, like all of us do. I was very thankful and that my tax dollars was able to fund such a vital and viral community organization as Amico 59th Street Center. And this is, again, from my personal view. I've been with Amico for about 10 years. And after raising our family of 3 kids, caring for my aged parents, my mother passed at 87 and dad at 99 plus 11 months, I guess it was time for my wife and I to locate another family for us to age together gracefully. Because obviously we don't want to sit home and do nothing, okay? We were very fortunate to have found and joined Amico 59th Street Senior Center. At this center, every member that I have been associated with, we have about 300 or 400 people that come every day. We sort of like look after each other. We're all in the same situation. We've all did our chores with our family and what have you. So now we have something in common. And it's amazing when I go there every day that everybody says hi and how you doing, what happened to her, why isn't she here today, and we found out she's on vacation. That's good. So these are things that I find is very, very helpful for us age seniors that are not ready for the so-called homes yet, okay? We have over 300 or 400, as Dr. Pastore said, a day comes in. But you know, we have over 100 volunteers like myself that go in there to help the operation. I personally
volunteer 3 days as a DJ to play music. We have dancing every day, 1 to 3, social dancing. And that, I think, is the main attraction for most of the people that come. Of course, we have a lot of activities that they're here for. And I can really say that this center really provides a family environment that's very vital. And as we age, we have to stay socially and mentally engaged. And I thank the opportunity to speak before you and hope that we have this continued operation at the 59th Street Senior Center. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Saint. Questions?
Yes.
Ms. Delos?
Thanks for being here. I'm just wondering, what's your favorite music that you like to spin?
I tell you, I have now, see, I volunteer, like I said, I provide the music. So we go on iTunes. I probably spent over $2,000 from everything from Latin, merengue, to ballroom dancing, to rumba, and what have you. So you come on down and we'll have your pick.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Lee Boyce from DIFTA.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
So the Amico Senior Center is one of our largest senior centers. As Joan Pastore spoke, it's not the greatest landlord at this place. We've had to hold his feet to the fire over the years. We do eventually get compliance with lease items. It often involves withholding rent. We are fortunate to have 18,750 square feet. It's a hard match in the neighborhood. The center has grown over the years. When I first came to the department in 1993, they only occupied the 3rd floor of the premises. Now they're in the 2nd and 3rd floor. The 2nd floor used to contain HRA offices. And initially the program was using it as a series of activity rooms. Over time, the need for an assembly location on the 2nd floor came into being. And one of the things that we need to resolve in this new lease is legalizing assembly on the 2nd floor. Right now, the occupancy on that floor is only 125 persons. We can bring it up to 272 persons. The occupancy on the 3rd floor is 233 persons. So the thing that's getting in our way are some building violations and some open job applications. We did the build out for assembly, but they aren't able to really assemble in the space until we can get the permit. I know you had asked some questions about blueprints for relocating centers, and the department actually, or I actually, have come up with a template. We looked at our overall portfolio and established a right size for a vibrant center. And so a vibrant center to us is a place that has room for congregating and breaking out into smaller groups. In general, the best size is about 75 square feet per person. That takes into account a commercial kitchen, bathrooms, offices, and allows for an assembly location and 2 or 3 activity rooms at a minimum. So that's something, we are always citywide looking for alternate locations, and that's something that I think the department could share with you. And it's just really kind of a square footage breakout and the types of rooms that we would need. As terms of this center, other issues that we want to bring up in the lease renewal is, since there's another tenant in the building, we want to have the elevator maintenance become a landlord responsibility. We're working out some utility aspects. Right now, the utilities are still on the city account, and we're going to get a reimbursement. So,
Thank you very much, Ms. Boyce. I have a bunch of questions. I appreciate that the department is looking for alternative spaces, not necessarily related to this particular center, because this does seem to be operating in a high-quality fashion. But it is between DIFTA and DCAS, where does the responsibility first lie to find spaces or alternative spaces? Do you see that as a DIFTA responsibility, or do you just rely on DCAS for that?
So we have a portfolio of 230 senior centers. Only 22 are city leased. So for city leased properties, we put together the sizes of spaces that we need, and DCAS takes the lead in identifying spaces, but oftentimes DIFTA works with the neighborhood group and says, DCAS, have you looked at this? Have you looked at this? For locations not in the city leased portfolio, we work directly with the not-for-profits.
So just to understand that those other 200 or so that are not city leased, you essentially have a contract with a not-for-profit provider. The not-for-profit provider is leasing directly and presumably to an extent the city is subsidizing the not-for-profit provider, but those leases would not come to us.
That's right.
And do you, in terms of what the city pays to not-for-profit providers, is that based on a per-person cost, a negotiated cost? Is the rent a factor in that, or just generally? I don't want to get into specifically how you fund, but just generally, how do you decide what the funding for these centers should be?
So it's my impression that a lot of the centers' budgets grew in a grassroots fashion. And so we have some programs that are well-funded for rent, and they are able to relocate if the need be. Other places that really don't have much of a rent budget and really rely on other not-for-profits in their community giving them discounted space.
Do you take rent into consideration when you decide or negotiate with each center and with each not-for-profit provider?
I think it's a case-by-case basis, depending on where they are. Of course, there are some neighborhoods where it's just impossible to find cheap space. It's becoming more and more problematic citywide. So it's there's no set type of rules. A lot of the centers seem to have come to the department through various means. I think 40 of them came from HRA. The others came up on a grassroots community level.
Because I don't know if you were here for our review session on Monday and
Yes.
overheard the discussion among the commissioners. Mr. Cantor and others have alluded to this today, but obviously in Borough Park, we are seeing a significant amount of development. Many of the neighborhoods where your centers or daycare centers are located are seeing a significant amount of development, and in many of these developments, the city is in fact subsidizing affordable housing, and where these kinds of uses, senior centers and daycare centers, would be highly desirable and provide an opportunity for a new resource or alternative resource to some of these existing leases. And I do think that our staff at City Planning, as well as HPD, EDC, and perhaps others, could be a resource to you and to DCAS in terms of alternative spaces that would be a win-win for all concerned.
We're very interested. We've started a dialogue with HPD and have identified a couple of sites in the Bronx that may be possibilities, but yeah, we're always interested.
Because obviously, we see, as Ms. Levin alluded to, we're seeing a wave of these renewals coming to us. We don't see those that are not being renewed. And obviously, we don't see those where you are funding the not-for-profit, but the not-for-profit is leasing directly. But I don't know, and maybe you have a sense of, at least with respect to DIFTA, to what extent, as new developments come online, you have found opportunities and alternatives to either opportunities for new leases, new senior centers, or alternatives to existing ones.
So we've only done a couple, and they've been in senior housing buildings. One was like a relocation, another was a new center. But it's, you know, the department is very in favor of hearing about all our options.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Knuckles.
I assume with the number of leases that DIFTA has outside of the DCAS responsibility, you have a dedicated staff that focuses exclusively on your real estate needs, or do you?
I have an extremely tiny staff. I have 4 people for the whole city.
4 people?
Yeah.
And you have how many private leases do you have?
So maybe it's 150, something like that. Yeah.
It's a lot of leases.
It's a lot of leases. Yeah, it's a lot.
Ms. Levin.
So, actually, I have a question. I hesitate to ask about the local level in the application in front of us, because I think this broader conversation is obviously of great importance for the city as a whole. The briefing package, the materials that we received, included an unsigned scope of work for this center. Nice to see that it does include fixing roof leaks around the stair door, which I assume is what Dr. Pastore was talking about. Are you familiar with this scope of work, and has it been negotiated with the landlord yet? It's not signed, so it's hard for us to know what its state of affairs is.
The DCAS lease negotiator is here and can speak to where he is in the negotiations. We initially put together a scope of work, then we joined a team from DCAS, just adding more systems type items to it, and we are ready to sign off on that scope of work. It's just, we just received a final draft this week.
Okay, good. But you don't know where it is, so it's for DCAS to tell us where we are with the landlord?
Yeah, they're the ones speaking to the landlord.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Deluz.
Thanks for being here. I'm just wondering if you could share a little bit, kind of going back to the broader conversation about how planning happens. And I'm just wondering to what extent projections in the demographic changes at the neighborhood level impact how you cite and or renew leases, to try to figure out what potential demand will be at a center level.
So the department did do a demographic study last year to determine where older adults are living, and there was, on an RFP level, was some adjustment in where we're delivering services. In terms of relocating programs, it's really like a very short distance from a current location, like maybe 6 blocks is probably our diameter.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for Ms. Boyce? I just would like to say that given the broader discussion, we would, for you and ACS and DCAS, like to schedule for one of our review sessions a broader discussion about this whole area and how we can get a better sense of your needs and also provide perhaps alternative resources, or identify alternative resources that you can pursue, and because I do think, especially with so many of these leases now up for renewal, to the extent that we can identify better alternatives, more modern alternatives, recognize the changing needs, particularly of seniors, I think that would be helpful to all of us. And I would urge you, particularly at DFTA and DCAS as well, to take a look at text amendments that the department has recently published that we hope to see enter into the formal land use process in the next couple of months, that are particularly addressed to senior housing, the changing needs of seniors, and the what we believe is enhanced opportunities for community facilities and affordable housing. So I would urge you to take, that is on the city planning website, and I urge you to take a look at that and
Okay.
give us your thoughts.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Ms. Boyes? Thank you very much. Next speaker is Scott Bernstein.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr.
My name is-
Bernstein.
Good morning. My name is Scott Bernstein. I work at DCAS. I'm a lease negotiator. I guess I'm here to answer a bunch of questions you may have.
Mr. Knuckles.
Good morning, Scott.
Morning.
I have two questions. We're obviously in the midst of one of these 20-year cycles. 93, 73, 93, 13. So how many leases are now, how many leases expired in 2013 and that you have to renegotiate, if you know, and I hope you do?
We're looking at approximately 150 that we're actively negotiating at this point.
And what is the department's strategy? You know, how are you going about renegotiating these things with presumably the least disruption to the tenancy?
It's been very stressful. There's only a handful of us. It's been challenging. This market's very challenging.
So these leases now that have expired, they're under license agreements, post-13? Is that how they're operating? How does
It's case-by-case basis. Remember, there are ones that require ULURP, other leases that are office uses that have already been approved, so we're trying to secure those tenancies. This was a unique case that did require ULURP approval again and an existing facility. What also actually created complications, this site was occupied by both ACS as well as DFTA, and things had changed. I do want to correct something that was mentioned on Monday. The ACS daycare actually vacated the premises in August 2013, not in 2012.
Well, that's the second part of my question, but I'm speaking not so much to Amico, obviously it's important, but to the larger portfolio. I mean, what's your projections about how soon are you going to be able to renegotiate all of the leases, or renew all of the leases that you want to renew, of course, and I presume that's most of them. And if there's an instance where you don't want to renew, you're going to have to relocate. I mean, what's the time frame on that? What's the plan?
Well, it typically takes us between a year and a half, around a year and a half, to secure a new lease. And as we had mentioned previously, we start that process 3 years in advance, whether it be a renewal or relocation. And we're looking at the sites, the operations, to make sure the sites meet the needs of that operation. In this particular case, it seemed that the center, their operations work. It is a difficult catchment area to find alternative space, so. But I would like to explore what you mentioned earlier about new development.
So is it your sense that most of these 150 leases or so are going to ultimately be renewed?
There are, of the 150, there are many that are relocations right now. Some that were affected by Sandy, So they're being displaced. They were displaced. So we're looking for new locations for them.
And how many of those fall into that category?
I would say it's about a handful of those. I mean, it's a record storage, fire department was hurt. There were some that were near the Gowanus Canal. So we're looking at sites there.
Yeah, I'm just speaking to these multi-service centers.
I don't believe any were impacted, to my recollection.
So with regard to process, where you have multiple agencies within one location, DFTA, until recently ACS, HRA, and as Dr. Pastor indicated, she rightly talks to the landlord about her needs. How are you making sure that you are ultimately speaking for all of these tenants when you talk to a singular landlord?
There's constant dialogue, especially with this landlord. We have several leases with this landlord in other locations. I'm hoping that the next generation, because this landlord is getting up there in age, I'm hoping that he's passing it on to family members, and I'm hoping that they will be more equipped to handle day-to-day operations and services and repairs.
Mr. Cantor.
Comes after the designation that, yes, we want this particular site, we'd like to make a deal. Is your group involved in determining whether we should go shopping, so to speak?
Yes, I mean, that would be, I guess, the first part. When a lease is coming up, an expiration, we will step in and we'll talk with our client agencies, find out what the issues were in the past history, if we don't know ourselves, and then either we will entertain a renewal or a relocation.
So you are in the
In particular, though, daycares and senior centers are extremely difficult to relocate because of the whole Euler process.
But it's impossible if you don't try.
I'm sorry?
But it's impossible if you don't try.
It's possible. We are relocating.
Ms. Levin.
Mr. Bernstein, thank you for coming. I guess I have to ask you the question that I asked to Ms. Boyce of DFTA, and she suggested that was for DCAS to answer. And that's about the state of negotiation of the scope of work. We have an unsigned scope of work in our package. It looks like it covers the things that need to be covered. Is it anything the landlord has signed off on yet, or have you not yet broached that topic?
We have. Actually, terms had been negotiated back in 2012. This is before the lease actually expired. There was a mandate by ACS at that time to do a short-term extension. So it kind of put a mandate on DCAS as to what we could do, and so we were just trying to deal with the repairs issues, at the site. But terms have been negotiated, and then in August 2013, ACS had vacated, and things had changed, and that's when we started revisiting to enter into a long-term deal. The landlord has been shared this scope of work. We're reviewing it now, and discussions for a long-term deal has been, we've been discussing many things. The utilities, the maintenance of the elevator to be their responsibility, that type of thing.
Okay. And are you going for another 20-year term?
Yes, we are.
Ideally? Okay. And the scope of work that we received is the post-ACS. It's the long-term lease
Correct.
version of the scope. Okay.
Just for DFTA.
Correct, understood. But
Yes.
it now includes the stuff that you would include for a long-term lease, not the
Correct.
short-term
Correct.
situation you described with ACS. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Bernstein, I know this is sort of a delicate question, and there may not be one simple answer to it which fits all situations, but from your perspective, what is At what stage in your negotiations with these private owners is it appropriate to bring the lease through or renewal through the public approval process? And is it when you have reached a verbal agreement? So in this case, the scope of work will in fact be the scope of work, or is this still a fluid situation, or most of these still a fluid situation where negotiations, assuming we and the city council do approve the renewal, negotiations still, a significant amount of negotiation still has to occur?
The protocol is to have terms, scope of work and terms negotiated, a signed term sheet before it would reach you. What's been happening, and again, it affects how DCAS also operates, is it's really ACS-driven in terms of their funding source is, based on child count. It's not on real estate, and there's been a lot of question as to overall operations. So there has been a lag with where we stand if we're doing a short-term deal, long-term deal. We're waiting for direction from ACS, and so therefore some of the ULURPs have been filed, and yet we're still not clear what we were, what our marching orders were.
I guess what I'm getting at is the later, from our perspective, leaving aside the overall timing that leases may have expired, which, and I do appreciate what you're saying about that, the later in the negotiating process that this comes before us, the more mature or close to consummation the terms of the renewal lease are when this comes before us, the better it is for all concerned. And if that's the case, is how do we assure ourselves and you that the terms that are presented to us are in fact the terms that ultimately, after our approval, the landlord actually agrees to and executes with the city? Would it be helpful to you to condition our approval on the term sheet, not helpful to you, and on the scope of work, not helpful to you, or what?
In our term sheets, we do state that it is conditioned upon 197 approval. So that's already in there.
No, but I'm asking sort of the reverse question, which is, if we condition our approval on that the scope of work as presented to us will in fact be incorporated into the lease, is that helpful to you or not helpful to you?
I don't believe that's helpful. I'm
And why
relying
not?
on a team of experts, engineers, architects that are doing their job in terms of site reports and with our end users to make decisions as far as what needs to be done.
I'm not saying we're substituting our judgment for yours, because we are not the experts on what has to be done, but rather to simply assure that what you've presented to us will in fact be incorporated into the executed lease by conditioning our approval on the scope of work that you have presented to us. And I'm just trying to, and I'm not trying to limit your discretion, but rather, in effect, to enhance your leverage, if you follow.
Yeah, I think that may create difficulties, because then what are we agreeing to with the landlord? If it's conditional upon this, in terms of conditions, then the landlord doesn't know what he's buying into, more or less.
But then, if what you've presented to us in a scope of work is not necessarily what ultimately is incorporated into the lease, how do we know that, in fact, what has to be done will be done?
Well, again, unless we get ULIP approval, we can't enter into a lease. Then we would have to revisit the terms at that point.
Ms. Levin?
Well, pursuing the same line of inquiry, I mean, the reason this has to go through ULIRP, I presume, we're not in the shoes of DFTA or ACS or DCAS for negotiating commercial terms, but I think we're supposed to be making a planning judgment that this is an appropriate location for this kind of facility and that the basic stuff that's being provided is appropriate for the city's needs. And so, at some level, it is important for us to know that we're not approving a new lease with a leaky roof or an HVAC system that doesn't work. There is a certain level of basic lease terms that I think are our business and that we have to be assured are going to be in place before we can approve, a new acquisition according to the ULIRP terms. So how can, recognizing that these negotiation situations are sometimes fluid and that they don't necessarily sync up with the ULIRP process, how can you give us the certainty that we need to approve a site selection?
Well, my point, what I was saying is we cannot enter into a lease until we have ULIP approval. So
Right.
if there are issues that is raised by the commission that we haven't addressed, we would have to revisit that with the landlord before we would get ULIP approval.
So then what do we do with our approval? Do we approve it on the condition that the roof doesn't leak and the elevator gets fixed?
Oh, what?
Do we identify the things that we know are essential?
Or that the
Or
scope
that
of,
are raised during,
We do have a time frame in the lease agreement. Once it's signed, the landlord has X amount of months to actually complete the work. If the landlord doesn't complete the work, there are day-for-day rent credits to the city to ensure that that work is done. And then there are ongoing remedies in the lease. For example, DFTA had mentioned they withhold rent at this location when a landlord's not performing.
Okay, but I'm not even at that point yet. I'm at the point of seeking assurance that those issues will be in the scope of work that's attached to the lease.
We will do our best to get you signed scopes of work, and that way you will see what is being done.
right, he doesn't understand.
It's attached, those scopes are attached to the lease agreement.
I understand, but we don't have the lease agreement when the ULIRP starts. So, and we don't need, we don't need detailed scopes of work. We need fundamental commitments about the condition of the premises.
Just to follow up on Ms. Levin's, just to make it very, very simple, Mr. Bernstein, if there's a situation where the roof is constantly leaking and we get a scope of work, as would be totally appropriate from you when the renewal comes before us, that we expect that scope of work indicates that one of the items is to repair the leaky roof. Shouldn't we be conditioning our ULIP approval on the fact that that leaky roof gets fixed if you enter into a lease, so that consequently, if you do negotiate a lease and the ULIP is approved, you could not enter into that lease unless a condition was that the leaky roof be fixed? Put it in its most simple terms.
Maybe I'm just thinking about this very differently, because when we identify in a scope, we do manage the construction. We're ensuring that it's done. Hopefully, when it's a replacement of a roof, landlord will have to file that, and we have to see plans that are being done when they file it. If it's a roof repair, that's a little bit more challenging, and I may have to defer that to architectural unit, not to put it off. I don't know how to, I mean, we can mention it in the lease. We have remedies if the landlord doesn't complete it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Cantor?
Let me try to be a little bit simplistic. You come before us, you generically, you come before us to approve a potential lease, telling us what you have in mind. We buy into it, or we suggest other things, you modify it. For whatever reason, in your continuing negotiations with the landlord, there's a minor mod and there's a real mod, okay? To use some similar language. I don't think we're suggesting that we help you with minor mods, but if there were a major mod that you, and once again I'm saying generically, not you personally, if there's a major mod that for whatever good reason you guys may feel it necessary to deviate from, we question why we are being asked to approve something which could be subject to a major mod. And how can we be more aware? Can we see, perhaps I'm not an attorney, could we see a term sheet when we get this presentation?
The term sheet talks to the financials, and it does go into timeframes for the completion of the work.
Doesn't it go into scope?
It references the scopes. The scopes.
Okay, then can we see a scope that goes with the presentation that you're coming to us with?
Well, that's, before you is a draft scope. We believe this will be the final scope of work that will be signed off on all parties.
I'm not
And
talking
that-
about this job. I'm not talking about this job at all. I'm talking about the future.
In general, we will do our best to get you signed scopes of work that will be attached to the lease
And I
agreements.
guess the question we're asking is, doing your best is doing your best, and having an agreement is having an agreement. You do your best during your continuing negotiation, because you're not done negotiating when you're seeing us. You make a change that is significant, where that line of significance is, I do not know, any more than I know when we change from a major mod to a minor mod, or vice versa. We're trying, as Commissioner Levin said, we're being asked to sign off on something, and we do so, and then the opportunity exists, or the situation occurs, where for good reason, the agency feels it has to modify its deal with, its potential deal with the landlord. We would like to explore, I believe it's fair to say that, we would like to explore the opportunity to have what we have approved more definitive, or making us more comfortable. And in so doing, while you say you can't sign the lease with the landlord, we say, well, he can't sign the lease with us.
Okay, if there are any material changes, we can have an internal discussion about sharing. If there were any revisions, I mean, we hope that once a scope of work is signed, that's why it is signed off, that is a final scope, and it's not subject to change. But if there is any significant change in a scope, we can share that with the commission.
Yeah, we will pursue this, as I indicated to Ms. Boyes, that we would like to have a DCAS, DIFTA, ACS in at a review session where we can explore all of these items. So thank you, Mr. Bernstein. I'm sorry, Mr. Knuckles and then Ms. Jung.
I just wanted to clarify the number of leases. You said 150. Is that just the multi-service, the child care, the senior centers, or is that the entire portfolio?
No, I was talking about active lease negotiations in the entire portfolio. I mean,
Okay.
we have 450 leases, but I'm talking about ones that are in active negotiations right now. I would have to look at the breakdown. I can't recall offhand what those multi-centers are.
Yeah, I'd like to know how many of these
Okay.
kinds of centers, uses?
I don't
that you're
believe it's
currently
that many,
negotiating?
but I'll get back to you.
Ms. Young?
Hi, Mr. Bernstein. Now, I'll try to separate out the things that are for architecture versus for you. So I assume that when you're doing these lease negotiations, you're also looking at sort of the cost burden in terms of utilities that would go along with that lease. Is that right?
We do, yes.
And do you, and I imagine you must have some sort of internal benchmark that you refer to when you look at comparable uses. So, costs that come in for senior centers generally in whatever range, that sort of thing?
We have an energy unit that's been working with our client agencies on that. It's not really under DCAS's purview, the leasing unit.
Yeah.
What we will do, though, when it's a relocation site, that's when we get more involved in energy efficient devices like LED and that type of thing.
So you obviously know where I'm going.
Yes, I do know where you're going.
I would like to, we got some information about just sort of the general process on these things, and I thought that was very helpful. I guess one piece that I'm just not really understanding is like, are you as a lease negotiator able to sort of, in review of the financials and and the operating costs and what have you, at some point do you then like say, well, this one is way out of line with what we'll be expecting to see, and then does that get sort of passed off to the energy group, or is it sort of like, how do you interact on a lease by lease basis with the energy efficiency folks?
I know that there are our energy group with our client agencies, they track spikes. If there is a spike in electricity or something, they'll investigate why there are spikes in that. My unit doesn't really get involved with that. We'll look at things. For example, with this site, we will have to sub-meter the facility as opposed to a direct meter, and the city does get discounted rates when it has a direct meter. So that's unfortunate, because now we're going to be increasing the rates. But if there were, when we got sub-meter electric bills from our client agencies and we saw that it was unusually high, we would investigate that.
Okay. I guess I'll just, it seems like there's a lot of conversation happening, at a lot of places, about using or driving more attention to energy efficiency and performance by making sure that any tenancy opportunities that the city may have are used sort of in an aligned fashion with with the sort of the more capital intensive type opportunities. And this seems like an important sort of transition point in these facilities, because again, you're leasing for a long term, and once that lease is signed, you're kind of in. So I guess that's sort of that's where my questions are coming from. So thank you.
I do want to add, last year we did a relocation for HRA, 200,000 square feet in the Bronx, and now is LEED Interior certified.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Any other questions for Mr. Bernstein? Thank you very much, Mr. Bernstein. We'll see you soon, I'm sure. Monica Rich.
Pleasure to see you all again. So
Good to see you, Ms. Rich.
here to answer any scope questions that you have really related to, in this case, to this senior center. So, which is really in quite good shape, which has been mentioned before. I think you may have some questions, so
Questions for Ms. Rich?
feel free to ask.
Ms. Jean.
I've been waiting for you.
Hi.
Hi,
Ms.
nice to
Rich.
see you.
Thank you for being here. So, I'm just learning about these processes, and so, I'm not intending to sort of nitpick the scope of work, or, I'm asking these sort of really so that I can learn how the process works. And thank you for that timeline. That was very helpful, or the process outline. One thing that, that I mentioned in the review session was that it would be also really even more useful to see sort of what the duration of each of these steps is expected to be and kind of how it lines up against that 3-year process that Mr. Bernstein, mentioned about, like, when you guys start evaluating these things. So that's sort of one request. And then it's specific to the scope of work in this case, there was a mention about, I think it was ventilation fans, right? So repair or replacement of ventilation fans. And I was wondering,
That might have been the other, right.
specifically, I was wondering whether there were any, if you could elaborate on some of the other sort of sustainability or technical requirements of that particular piece of work. And then, my train of thought went from there to sort of, at other agencies like HPD, there's been a movement over time to have standard scopes of work that are aligned with sustainability goals. And, for example, they've recently revised the standards for doing capital needs assessments so that it actually requires instrumented testing for energy performance related issues and water conservation and things like this. And so I was wondering if you could also address, whether that's something that DCAS is considering for situations like this, having standard scopes of work that have sort of more better than code kinds of things built in, and whether there's a movement toward having instrumented tests as part of your assessments.
Okay. This is a multi-question.
I'm sorry, I can repeat them in order
But the
later.
first part actually, I think, has to do with the second scope of work, because on the exhaust fans, I think are actually in the DIFTA ACS one.
Oh, is that okay?
But not a problem. Here, I mean, this isn't really in, this center is really in pretty good shape. The biggest thing is like the egress and sort of life safety going up to the roof, where the door going up to the roof is swinging the wrong way, and there's an exit sign is required. There's panic hardware is required there. Otherwise, I think, and the roof repairs and all leaks associated with that are kind of the main thing that's really here. Then in a way, kind of migrating from that to your second question, while we start with a standard scope of work, which has a lot of different options in it, so many of these centers are so unique. So, I mean, that's why, we have to go out there and really visit them, and not only visit them, we can't go visiting them by ourselves. We have to go along with ACS and DIFTA and really partner with them. And then these scopes also become basically kind of a, we all work together, DIFTA, ACS, kind of back and forth, reviewing these scopes to make sure that all, everything, as DIFTA said, they kind of had their own sort of cheat sheet list, and then we put it together with our scope. So, we have emails back and forth for, a couple of months. So that's where it does take time to formulate something that is, really has teeth and has, all the details that are required. So.
Yes.
If I might just ask a clarifying question, I mean, but when you do when whoever your assessment provider does the physical needs assessment, I imagine they're following some sort of protocol for visual inspection only. Is that right? Like, I forget what the number, triple E
That's true.
standard
We
number,
have both
whatever.
architects and engineers on our staff who go out and do these site reports. And so the engineers definitely train to, look at the HVAC and, the sprinklers and all the engineering systems, right?
So I would be interested in knowing, for just future reference at some point, whether you're following a standard for visual inspections or whether there are instrumented tests that are mandated also as part of the assessment.
I think it's mostly visual inspections. I mean, we don't go up, we don't have instruments at our disposal to check on the CFMs. So, for example, that's what you're asking.
Something like that.
That would be an example, right?
Yeah.
But we don't have CFM, things, and we don't go up on ladders and check generally.
Okay, well,
Unless
thank you.
there's something very specific, and totally, but we don't have that type of instrument.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Ms. Rich? Thank you, Ms. Rich.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Yes.
Is there anyone else who wishes to be heard on this matter? And if not, this hearing is closed.
Okay. Borough of Manhattan, calendar numbers 10 and 11. Calendar number 10, CD 10, C150121 PQM. Calendar number 11, C150122 PQM. A public hearing in the matter of applications for the acquisition of property concerning Early Life Center and A. Philip Randolph Senior Center.
First speaker is Dale Lazerson from DCAS. Welcome, Ms. Lazerson.
Thank you. That is a tough presentation to follow, but good dialogue. Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Weisbrot. My name is Dale Lazerson. I am with DCAS, the Asset Management Leasing Department of DCAS. Okay, thank you. Sorry. Now I might be screaming at you. Careful. And I am, as I mentioned, with the leasing group. I am here to present to you the real estate-related component and answer questions about the real estate transaction, which is related to the ULURP application in front of you. That application, as you know, is for the continued use of this particular property, which houses two of our client agencies, ACS Daycare Center Services and DFTA Senior Center Services. This particular property, to recap the visuals we have here, is located in the Hamilton Heights area of Upper Manhattan. The agencies have had a presence at this particular site since the 70s. Subsequently, a 20-year lease renewal from 1993 was entered into that has expired, and the agencies are currently operating at the site under a lease that is on a month-to-month basis. We are seeking a 3-year, 3.5-year, just about, renewal transaction, an extension of the existing lease. The site serves the agencies very well. It's very well situated in Hamilton Heights to service the community. Therefore, you would wonder, why aren't we seeking a longer term? At this particular time, it is not available to us, unfortunately. The property was purchased by a dynamic developer in 2014. And the developer is seeking an opportunity, or has intentions to redevelop the site, like we've heard many times in Manhattan. The proposed redevelopment may include retail, some commercial space, perhaps residential, and hopefully some community service uses. So we are in early dialogue at this point in time with that particular developer to see if we can't carve out a footprint for continued services, community services. However, it is very early for both the developer as well as the city to make a determination as to whether or not our footprint within the redevelopment would make sense, financially, square footage, design layout, et cetera. So again, to recap, we're seeking a relatively short-term extension of the existing lease. The owner, the developer, our landlord, has been gracious. He is going to extend the existing lease under the same terms and conditions that is proposed, which includes responsibilities by both parties toward maintenance and repair of the facility. As you will hear from some of my colleagues, we have our client agency and my colleague at DCAS Design and Construction, we have done an assessment of the current health and safety, if you will, the condition of the building. And there are some things that do need to be done, but in general, the building is in good shape. So to recap, this particular extension will allow the client agencies to continue their services uninterrupted for a period of time. And as, thank you. That's harsh.
You could finish the sentence. So we're not that harsh.
Okay. Thanks. And as mentioned, we're in early dialogue with the existing developer as to whether or not there might be an opportunity to continue at this site. However, shortly, we will be receiving programming requirements from both agencies to determine what their future looks like and what their needs are. And once we receive those, we will be diligently pursuing the market to see what's available in the market. We might find something that's even better. And I know that we have a landlord representative in the audience, so there's your competition.
Thank you, Ms. Light. More than completing the sentence. So. And I apologize for mispronouncing your name. But
thank you.
just to be clear, is the expectation on the part of the new owner to do a rehab of this site or to tear down this building and do a new development, or is that not clear yet?
I believe at this point in time, given the age of this building, that it will be a complete raising, an excavation, and a redevelopment, not a renovation.
Okay,
And good for us. Good opportunity for us, I say.
thank you. And I will ask you, as I asked in the previous application, given the fact that you do have to find new space, at least temporarily and perhaps permanently, are you in touch with either staff here or at HPD or at EDC or one of a number of different agencies that are doing development and are providing subsidies to development in the broader neighborhood?
So immediately, as of today, we're not necessarily in direct contact with the agencies that you are speaking about and with your particular commission. However, we do have a process that when we have any renewal as well as a relocation prospect on the horizon, we are diving into the city-owned portfolio and as best as we can into the city-leased portfolio. And we're doing that in concert with the client agency's requirements to see what's available, first and foremost, and whether or not it makes sense. Additionally, through a very proactive market search, we would consider all resources, not only through brokerage channels, but through perhaps professional relationships with other developers, with landlords, with partner agencies, with assistance from our Manhattan Borough President's Office in this particular situation, for example. So we will network as much as we can to find the right alternatives.
Well, I would just urge you to develop and explore the development agencies, at least that I mentioned, because these developments, as you know, have lead times that are significantly longer than 3 years in many cases, and but where potential community facilities can certainly aid the economics of an otherwise subsidized project, which would not necessarily be in city ownership or part of the city's lease portfolio, because they'd be owned by a private party and simply subsidized by the city. But it does strike me that this could be a positive development for both the new development and for your colleagues and clients.
Yes, absolutely.
Mr. Knuckles.
Ms. Lazarson,
Yes, thank you.
in your consideration of sites, or at least the agencies, impacted agencies here, would they have to remain within Community Board 10?
I am waiting on the programming requirements to have that question answered, because I think that the programs may overlap other programs in the area, so we will get those requirements to make that determination. And then actually, it's a great question, because that will help us determine our geographic boundaries. Yeah.
Well, I think, subject to, finding out, I think it a reasonable presumption that it would, because services like these not only impact clients, but they come to the attention of elected officials, who will strongly advocate that these services not be dislocated or remain. So my point is, assuming you have to stay within Community Board 10, you have a finite number of sites. So, I don't know the percentages, but I think it's clearly a strong likelihood that this developer will not entertain this use in his future endeavors. I mean, 40,000 square feet is a lot of space for a mixed-use site, a single use anyway. So I think you should, with all due respect, be about the business of looking at other sites, because
Certainly, we will
I think you're going to have to relocate.
Yes, we will cast the widest net, but we always want to have an opportunity at the incumbent site. But to your point, we may need swing space. that we swing out.
Yeah,
and
you're going to
into.
definitely need swing space.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I would just urge you to consult with the expert over here, Mr. Knuckles, on this, this neighborhood. So,
I have to judge this.
Okay. Milton Heights.
any other questions for Ms. Lazarson? Ms. Ortiz?
Hi. I was just sort of curious in the, you know, in the borough president's recommendation in 1991, there's an indication that 135 youngsters were served at this facility. And then in, you know, the more recent briefing sheet, it mentions that there's 75 children being served, but the square footage hasn't changed significantly that I can tell. So I'm curious what's happening in terms of the trend of daycare needs.
So I think I'm going to refer that, response to that to our ACS client agency, talking about programmatic needs and how this particular facility is servicing children in the community. There's also another facility down the street or just around the corner.
Okay.
So maybe some balance there.
And on the senior side, maybe that's an appropriate question. You know, we were recently told, and it was shared with us, that maybe an ideal was about 75 square feet per senior. I wondered what you thought of that sort of general calculation, because even here, it seems like you're oversubscribed here when you do the math by 20 or 30 seniors.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Again, with respect to the programmatic need, I'll ask the client agency representatives to speak toward it. However, it's an interesting observation that you make. And I do think that it may correlate to the age of these buildings and the generosity that we had in footprints at the time when some of these buildings were delivered. Going forward, not only strategically for operations as we revisit, as our client agency revisits what they do, they get more efficient, obviously. Real estate does as well. So I think, full disclosure, I am a neophyte with the city of New York. I have been here for 6 months. I come from the private sector. So with that said, I have not had an opportunity to take a very forensic look at the benchmarking of square footage with some of our agencies. However, Lee Boyce for DFTA certainly has a great understanding of the senior centers and their footprint. When we move forward, either to a new site or even if we find a footprint within this site, whether or not it is the current square footage will again depend upon programmatic needs and the efficiency of using new space.
So potentially, you're saying there could be a need for less square footage per senior, and you could still serve them adequately?
Potentially, as we are better using real estate, new real estate delivered. Older real estate is not necessarily as dynamic in supporting internal operations, but new real estate potentially.
Okay.
Potentially. It's
Thank
early. Yeah.
Any other questions, Ms. Lazarson? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Lee Boyce. Welcome back. It's been a while.
Hi, so it's the A. Philip Randolph Senior Center. It's a similar story. It's been around since the 70s. We renewed in the 90s. We'd like to renew again. Unfortunately, this location has become a development site. We're anxious to work with DCAS to look at other opportunities within the neighborhood. In terms of the square footage per senior, 75 is ideal. We can go down as low as 30 square feet per senior, but then things start feeling crowded. To give you sort of a idea code-wise, 15 square feet per person is assembly requirement seated at tables. This facility, it's in fairly good shape. The landlord is taking care of some issues we had with yard drainage. There were a couple of issues that we really wanted taken care of, but it's a short-term deal, and so we're doing what we can. Questions?
Thank you. Questions, Ms. Boyce? Tired us out last time. Thank you, Ms. Boyce. The next speaker is Lorelei Vargas.
checking the clock to see if I say good morning or good afternoon. Good morning. So I'm Lorelei Vargas. I'm the Deputy Commissioner over at Early Care and Education. So I oversee all of our child care programs for ACS. And I am officially 4 months on the job, so full disclosure. So Lutheran Social Services, in this particular space, this is one of 350 center-based child care programs that we have across the city. In this particular space, we have 5 classrooms. This space is leased to provide services to 110 children. Currently, the enrollment in this particular program is at around 62%, so pretty low enrollment. Again, we have 5 classrooms. It's a full-time center serving preschool children from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., Monday through Friday. It is one of our early learn programs here in the city. And I welcome any questions that you might have.
Questions for Ms. Vargas? Ms. Ortiz?
Hi, so you mentioned that, your enrollment is at 62%. Is that sort of earlier I'd asked the question that in the early 90s, there were about 135 children there. Now you've got about 75. So to what do you attribute some of the reduction?
So my understanding is that we have areas, as I've looked at, I've requested maps of my child care facilities, along with maps of our UPK, new UPK initiative, and where those programs and services are located. It stands to be noted this is a preschool program, so they are serving 3 to 4-year-olds, and so the UPK program serves 4-year-olds. And there are also 2 other programs in the same area. So when I look at a map of my programs, what I see is programs like this that are in oversaturated areas of childcare. And so we have in New York City both areas that are oversaturated with childcare and areas that are, what I'm calling childcare deserts. What exactly we can specifically attribute the reduction in enrollment to, I can't specifically say for this site, but I just wanted to speak to some of the trends that we're seeing. We've commissioned a community needs assessment to take a look at this issue across the city, as well as look at trends and demographics across the city, get a better understanding of children who are going to child care centers in these oversaturated areas. Do they live in the community, or do the parents work in the communities? So we're trying to just get a better understanding of that. And we are looking at, I know there have been a lot of questions about, sizes of portfolios, where we have 78 leases in our portfolio, which total about 37 million, including heat, light, and power. And so we're taking a very close look at all of those leases.
Thank you.
Ms. Levin?
Ms. Vargas, I want to thank you for coming. We've had a whole wave of these come before, and I think there's a pent-up curiosity on the part of the Commission to better understand the physical needs of these facilities, and we appreciate having your higher-level perspective available to us, even though it's relatively newly arrived at. But so I imagine that, so this is a general question, it's not about this particular facility, but there are so many of them that were originally built in the, 40 years ago now, at a time when, as the previous speaker indicated, the world was a lot more generous about real estate for these facilities. But I imagine also it's a time when the delivery of this kind of service was very different. I would imagine more in the childcare arena than perhaps any others. How difficult is it to deliver top-level programming that you would like in these older facilities? And as we pursue opportunities for new facilities, what do we need to be looking for?
So, as you're aware, childcare space is highly regulated. It is, in some ways very different from senior space. It is very highly regulated in terms of how many children you can have in a particular space, how big the space needs to be, how many square feet have to be allotted per child in a classroom. And to make matters more complicated, some of our funders outside of New York City, so for example, the Office of Head Start, where we receive federal dollars, have different regulations that we have to abide by that actually differ from DOHMH's regulations around square footage, for example. So it is a very complicated, childcare is, we deal with children, but it's extremely complicated, and as you all know, extremely politicized in this city as well. There are a number of health and safety issues, particularly in some of the older buildings, that have to constantly be addressed. We are, as I understand it, we have many leases, and as we're coming up on leases and landlords are requesting triple net leases where ACS has to take responsibility for everything in the building, it's a major problem for us. And, we have been very clear that we are not interested in paying more for physical space than we are paying for the service itself. And so given that, we really, again, I go back to the analysis that we have to conduct to take a look at, what are it's 78 center-based programs are part of a city lease of a portfolio of 350 programs, right? Center-based programs across the city, all total serving about 31,000 children in the city. So the programs, I think, do an excellent job of providing the services in these spaces. There are complexities around who is responsible for certain fixes. Again, we are trying not to do triple net leases because it is just an expense that goes above and beyond. And frankly, part of the analysis that we've asked for, the preliminary analysis that I was given just gives me the cost of the lease and heat, light, and power. But there are many, many indirect costs that go into maintaining these leases. And so I've asked for an analysis that gives me a true cost of what the expense is for the leases so we can get a sense of what we're spending. That being said, there might be areas that are childcare deserts where we have one program, and it's the only program within, several miles, and there might be limited transportation where we have to invest. And we have to really actively find spaces in those communities to provide the service.
Thank you very much, Ms. Vargas. Any other questions? Ms. Jung?
So, in the prior calendar item, we learned that DCAS has their energy unit working with the client agencies on looking at some of the, I imagine, utility costs and what have you. Could you speak to sort of where you are in that conversation currently?
I would actually defer that to DCAS and to our admin group that really works more closely with DCAS on those particular issues.
Okay.
Any other questions for Ms. Vargas? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Anna Kolaris.
Good morning. It's still morning. I'm Anna Kolaris, Assistant Commissioner for Facilities at ACS. The Early Life Children's Center occupies second floor at 110 West 146th Street, we know, and there's approximately 15,000 square feet, 5 classrooms. We have also a rooftop, it's a playground roof. Is approximately 10,000 square feet, and I'm open to any question you might have about the facility.
Questions for Ms. Kolaris? Ms. Jung?
May I just repeat the question that I asked a minute ago about working with DCAS on some of the energy and sort of utility cost issues? How much, where you are in that work, and how you're finding it?
Yes, this is facility we work with DCAS. We have a PASNI account, and it means that we have some discount in the energy. So we are working on that. I can get back to you about the numbers. I don't have that information right now with me, but I know that this one of the facilities that you work with PASNI. PASNI is a nonprofit that is an agency that DCAS works and has a partnership that the energy can have some discounts. That I know, but I don't know more information. Can get back to you on that in terms of numbers, how much we're saving.
Okay, so just to clarify, I mean, I guess what I had imagined from hearing the earlier comment was that there's a group within DCAS is focusing on energy efficiency of these leaseholds, and so I guess that if you could add that information when you.
Okay, because I thought you were talking about electrical bills. Also.
Both.
Yes.
Cost and,
yes.
Yeah,
and also.
efficiency,
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions for Ms. Claris? Thank you very much, Ms. Claris.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Kenneth Robinson.
Good morning, Chair, Commissioners. I'm Kenneth Robertson. I'm from the General Counsel's Office of ACS, and I don't have much to add. My colleagues have spoken at such length and knowledgeability that all I can say at this point is to urge the Commission to approve the application. Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Robinson? Thank you, Mr. Robinson.
Thank you.
And for a reprise performance, Monica Rich.
Hello again. So this is, as we know, is a short-term lease renewal, and these bullet points that you see in front of you are both from ACS and DFTA, and basically have to do with some of the health of the building in general. So the first few points are life safety egress issues, again, which is really, the first thing that we always look at. And there's also, existing exhaust fans in the restrooms here, which I think had some motor malfunction, which we definitely want to see corrected. Also, there's a fan on the roof, which I think was a DFTA fan that we want to have raised up so the exhaust does not, hit the children that play on the roof. So we want to make sure these type of things, even though it's a short-term deal, that these things get taken care of.
Questions? Ms. Zhang.
So, Mr. I'm sorry about confusing the two projects earlier, but since you are here, I wonder if we might just talk about the exhaust fan situation for 1 minute. So, as you know, the minimum exhaust requirements for exhaust fans were lowered in the last several years, right? And so that causes me to wonder whether in this scope of work, as you're asking for those fans to be repaired, is there a target CFM that you're asking for that's different from what the fans originally would have been put in service at 20 years ago?
Well, I know that we certainly wanted to meet the codes that are.
Well, it sets a minimum but not a maximum, so it's.
I can get back to you with an exact CFM if you would like, so.
Thank you.
No problem.
Any other questions for Ms. Rich? Thank you, Ms. Rich.
Thank you.
Lucian Reynolds from the Manhattan Borough President's Office.
Good morning, Chair Weisbrod, Commissioners. My name is Lucian Reynolds, and I'm here to speak on behalf of Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer regarding the application to allow the city to enter into a new lease agreement on behalf of the Administration for Children's Services and the Department for the Aging for an existing facility at West 146th Street. DCAS is negotiating a number of 20-year leases for the current renewal wave of senior citizen and child care centers. Their efforts, along with those from ACS and DIFTA, should be applauded as these facilities are crucially important to our communities. These centers are critical for communities they serve, so it is our responsibility to ensure when reviewing these applications that the facilities are in the best of conditions and are maintained that way throughout the lease cycle. The expected duration of their lease will be extremely short in comparison with the multiple 20-year leases that we have seen for similar facilities. While the Borough President recommends approval, we find the shortened lease period troubling. If the currently projected lease period is any indicator of the future, property owners of underbuilt, single-use facilities have a strategic interest to consider the redevelopment of their property as interest in the market rate residential and commercial units continues to grow. The interest is in conflict with preserving these important services. Indeed, in markets where the pressure to redevelop parcels becomes more lucrative as the demand for market rate housing increases, even purpose-built structures may become potential development sites. The Borough President asked for leadership from the Department of City Planning to plan for a citywide strategy to provide new leasing options for these neighborhood programs. DCAS, ACS, and DIFTA can only hope to react to the changing preferences of property owners in the face of lucrative development alternatives. As DCP considers how to best construct and preserve 200,000 residential units, thought should also be given to the effects of hot, developing, and emerging markets on vulnerable populations that inhabit the opposite ends of the age spectrum and the development pressures on these privately owned buildings in which the city operates essential services for these populations. For this particular facility, the city should ensure that appropriate steps are taken now to find a new home for both the daycare and senior center facility, and that a framework is put in place to ensure community involvement in that process.
Thank you very much. Questions? Ms. Levin?
No, I think I would have just observed that I hope you've gleaned from the previous conversation that we're on it.
Thank you.
And with that note, this hearing, unless there is anyone else who wishes to be heard, this hearing is mercifully closed. Thank you.
Okay. Borough of Manhattan, calendar number 12, CD4, C150110, ZSM. A public hearing in the matter of an application for the grant of a special permit concerning 551 West 21st Street parking garage.
First speaker is Gary Tarnoff.
You on a daycare lease, guy?
No daycare lease. Good afternoon, Chairman Weisbrod and Commissioners. My name is Gary Tarnoff of the law firm of Kramer Levin, Neftalis, and Franco. We are land use counsel to 551 West 21st Street, owner LLC, which is the applicant for a special permit for a 53-space public parking garage in a development located at the northeast corner of 11th Avenue and West 21st Street. The site is located in sub-area D of the Special West Chelsea District and is split between the C6-3 zoning district, 91% of the site, and M1-5 zoning district, 9% of the site. The C6-3 district has a base FAR of 5 that may be increased to 7.5 through a combination of a transfer from the High Line and provision of inclusionary housing. The M1-5 district generates 5 FAR. The subject building generates the full 2.5 FAR bonus available in the C6-3 district by purchasing High Line transfer floor area and through the inclusionary housing program. With respect to affordable housing, 15,628 square feet of inclusionary housing certificates were purchased from a affordable housing development located at 450 West 42nd Street in Community District 4. The proposed garage will occupy part of the ground floor and cellar level of a 19-story mixed-use building with 44 dwelling units and a 10,000 square foot commercial art gallery. As of right, parking is limited to 12 spaces. The applicant seeks approval for a public parking garage since the garage is partly in an M1 district where accessory residential uses are not allowed. The proposed garage will serve both residents and visitors to the building, as well as a growing demand for parking in West Chelsea by residents of other buildings. Due to its location at the western edge of West Chelsea, the proposed garage is not expected to attract commuters.
2005 final environmental impact statement for West Chelsea projected a parking shortfall within the West Chelsea study area of between 538 overnight spaces and 1,529 midday spaces. The data collected in the residential growth parking study analysis that our consultants performed and that was submitted with this application document that, in fact, the projected parking shortfall has occurred. 8 parking facilities with a total of 1,499 spaces have closed since 2003. Only 8 of the 28 developments containing 2,577 dwelling units have provided parking. As documented in this parking analysis submitted with our application, the residential growth parking ratio for the study area will be only approximately 10% in the build condition, which is below the 20% target ratio prescribed in the zoning ordinance. Representatives of the project architect are here this morning if there are any questions regarding the design of the building. I note that Community Board 4, which approved the application, conditioned their recommendation of approval on providing all signage for the garage to be located within the motor court and not on the street frontage. Our plans show no signage on the street frontage. None is contemplated. Any signage that we would provide would be in the motor court, most likely on this eastern wall of the garage. Going easterly on West 21st Street would be able to see it.
Thank you, Mr. Tarnoff. Questions for Mr. Tarnoff? Ms. Levin.
I assume, have you received the Manhattan Borough President's
Yes, we have.
recommendation
I
that
believe
came
they're here
in?
to testify.
They're here to testify, but I'm here to ask you if you've had a chance to review it and if you're able to respond. They had conditions in there
Well,
regarding bicycle parking.
They didn't have conditions, they had comments, but the comment was that they questioned the appropriate where the bicycle parking should be located.
Whether the very small number of bike parking spaces that are required by zoning couldn't be located closer to the street.
Yes. Well, the ground floor is very tight. We didn't have a chance to look at that, but we will look at that.
Okay.
I don't know that there is a location. They also asked that any signage include signage for the bicycle parking, and we certainly could commit to do that.
Yeah.
But we will look and see if there's a space. I have my doubts, but that's something we'll
Okay.
investigate and get back to the department.
Okay, before we get to the point of voting on this, it would be great to have your client's response to the suggestions of the Borough President.
Understood.
Thanks.
Any other questions for Mr. Tarnoff? Thank you, Mr. Tarnoff.
You're welcome.
Next speaker is Jeff Rubin.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Jeff Rubin. Actually, it's good afternoon. I wrote good morning, but I have to amend my comments. Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Jeff Rubin. I'm a planner with Philip Habib & Associates. There are 2 sets of transportation findings for this garage special permit. The first is related to traffic, and the second is related to parking need. First, traffic. The potential for traffic impacts in the area was considered as part of the application. The proposed 53 spaces, 41 more than is allowed as of right for the development, would not generate traffic impacts. For the facility's peak hour, we estimate an increment of approximately 19 vehicle trips driving to and from the site during the weekdays from 5 to 6 p.m. That would be the peak hour. These vehicles would not create conflicts with existing vehicle or pedestrian traffic, given the low level of trips. We found that the surrounding road network is sufficient to handle this relatively small number of trips. The second finding relates to parking need. Pursuant to the city's guidelines for this parking special permit, Philip Habib & Associates prepared a study comparing the increase in residential units to the net change in residential parking spaces within a 1/3 mile study area during a 13-year study period. We found that by the time this building will be occupied in 2016, there will have been an increase of over 2,500 residential units within the study area, including 23 buildings completed by 2014 and an additional 5 buildings completed by 2016. But during this same period, the study area will experience a net increase of only 210 residential parking spaces. Even with the proposed 53 parking spaces In this application, the ratio of new residential parking spaces to new residential units will be approximately 10%, substantially below the target of 20%. Therefore, the proposed garage meets the finding for neighborhood need based upon residential growth and change in parking supply within the study area. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Mr. Rubin? Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Michael Sandler from the Manhattan Borough President's Office.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Michael Sandler, here on behalf of Borough President Gail Brewer to speak in support of this application. While the Borough President is generally highly skeptical of the need for additional parking in the Manhattan core, the proposed public parking facility is small in size and unlikely to create additional traffic or encourage the use of car travel. The residential growth study accompanying this application lays out the loss of parking in close proximity over the same period as significant residential growth. The Borough President has previously raised concerns with some of the parameters and underlying assumptions of the residential parking study and has asked that proximity to transit and location within the Manhattan core should be considered in these applications. This garage, however, does not raise these prior concerns due to its location near the West Side Highway towards the perimeter of the Chelsea neighborhood and is therefore appropriate. I'd like to briefly address bicycle parking. Section 3671 of the zoning resolution requires 1 bike parking space for every 10 car spaces in all public parking garages. New Yorkers, however, are unaccustomed to parking bikes inside of public parking garages. On top of this, most parking garages seem to be charging unreasonably high rates for bike parking, presumably so that empty bike spaces can be used to park cars. If the City Planning Commission believes that bike spaces should be a part of public parking facilities, it should ensure, when reviewing discretionary actions, that the included bike parking is legitimate, prominent, and accessible. The proposed parking garage would have cyclists leave their vehicle with an intendant to be parked, but this assumes that any cyclists know the existence of these spaces. While this parking garage is appropriate, the Commission and the applicant should consider whether these bike spaces could be given a more prominent location, perhaps within the motor court. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Mr. Sandler? Ms. Ortiz.
Hi. Earlier in reviewing this, I actually noted, how does the public know that these bike spaces are available? And in your mind, and given also proximity to Chelsea Piers and the West Side Highway, you imagine that there's probably pent-up demand for parking like this. What is your sense of what should be done in terms of an alternative or letting people know? Or do you think that mostly residents will be using this?
Well, residents of the building have their own parking that's part of, the residential accessory requirements. So within the lobby of the building, there is parking for the residents. And there's sort of a question of whether this particular garage versus all garages and where the requirement should be. And so all garages should have bike parking and should have it prominently on their sign. And if New Yorkers knew that this was available and it was cheap, they would know that they could just go park here. And so I think a first step would be that whenever there's a discretionary application, the Commission could require that it's prominently in the signage, could ask about rates, and help seed a few parking garages that the public can start to know that these exist, is our thought. I don't know, did that answer the question?
Yeah. And another question, unrelated, I'm just curious that, there seemed to be a split in the community board, over this issue, although they voted in favor. Do you have any insight into what the issues were? Because I can't quite glean it from.
Yeah, I mean, I would not presume to speak for the community board, but I was there, and there's a significant number of folks in the community board that just, like the borough president, are highly skeptical of parking and sort of under any circumstance hadn't had a problem with a discretionary action for additional parking in the neighborhood. But then there were also folks that looked at the findings and, like the Commission is likely to do, and felt that it met them, so.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Levin.
Michael, do you happen to know how the vote was at the relevant land use committee on this action? I mean, did the split turn up at the full board meeting, or was it also present at the committee discussion?
Yeah, I think there was a bigger split at the full board than at the committee. Mr. Tarnoff has said it was 7 to 2 at the
Thank you.
committee meeting.
Any other questions, for Mr. Sandler?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sandler.
Thank you.
And is there anyone else who wishes to be heard on this matter? Hearing none, the hearing is closed. Madam Secretary, is there anything else that should come before us today?
No, Chairman Weisbrod.
With that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I hear no objections. Thank you very much.